Welcome to the Business Seller Center Expert Interview Series. Today we're talking with Jeff Swiggett about how buyers value your business. And this is one of the 4 conversations with Jeff about preparing to exit and maximizing your business value when it's time to sell. I'm Kevin Murray, and I'm your host today. Jeff Swiggett is an award-winning business sales expert and certified intermediary, experienced in negotiation, business valuations, deal structures, deal terms, and exit strategies. He's the owner of VR Business Sales in New Haven, a business brokerage providing exceptional merger and acquisition advisory services to companies in Connecticut, Southern New England, and Metro New York. Jeff is one of the few business brokers in New England that has secured the prestigious designations of Certified Business Intermediary from the International Business Brokers Association and a Mergers and Acquisition Master Intermediary from the M&A Source. He's also a member of the Board of Directors for the M&A Source and is the organization's chairperson for 2022. VR Business Sales was named by the M&A Source as the top 2 to 5 person M&A advisory firm for 2020, and it received the M&A Source Platinum Award for conducting over $15 million of transactions in 2021. As part of Jeff's work in helping sellers understand the value of their business, Jeff created a risk adjustment factor matrix that evaluates each business on its management dependency, financial controls, the end markets that they serve, customer concentration, the supplier base, and the competition. Not only does this help uncover deeper strengths or weaknesses that buyers will find, this tool can also be a guide for business owners in their exit preparation to increase the business value before you go to market. We're including a free download with this matrix on this page. Well, thank you for joining us. And again, welcome to Jeff Swiggett from VR New Haven. And we're going to be talking about the risk adjustment factors that are the things that you need to know as a seller about how the buyer is going to be evaluating your company and how you can prepare yourself when it's time to go to market. And these are some of the things that buyers are going to be looking at and thinking about. So, Jeff, we're going to be talking today about management dependency issue and financial controls, which is part of your 6-point model. Can you just start out by giving us a definition for what you mean by management dependency, what that category is speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, I think what that means primarily is how strong is your organization independent of the ownership, really. So I think often for smaller businesses, and I'm talking about businesses that are maybe doing revenues between $500,000 to $1 million, something like that. It's usually the businesses aren't large enough really to support kind of a strong organizational network. So it's often heavily dependent upon the owner to to do the sales, to run the operation, or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And but that's not true, just true of small organizations. It also could be true of large organizations who haven't developed a good organization, but maybe have the capacity to do so and ought to think about investing it. Because the further the owner can get away from being the face to the customer, the one responsible for the entire operation, the more independent that person can be from their business, the more valuable it becomes to a potential buyer. So as you could imagine, if you put yourself in a buyer's shoe, if eventually you buy a business or your organization buys a business and the owner and that business that you buy is heavily dependent upon the owner that you're buying out, who is going to transition away into retirement, then it becomes more problematic for the new buyers when that happens. So the easier you can make that transition happen for a buyer, the more valuable your business becomes.
All right, great. Yeah, I've said to some potential sellers that the idea is, if you don't have good management systems and if the owner's got to be there all the time, then you're buying a job. You're not buying a business. You're taking over the owner's job to do all these things versus if they can go away for a month and on holiday and the business still goes on with the owner not there, that's got value. All right,
You know, I
great.
mean, the best thing I can hear when I'm talking to a seller is that he works in the business about 5 hours a week. If that's the case, you know, just his business is well managed, well run, well organized, and independent, and does so independent of him. And that's as attractive as it can get to a buyer.
Great, great. Yeah, and at the other extreme, I talked with a guy that's working 12, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, doesn't have any help. It's like,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
who wants to buy that?
he's
Right.
making really good money, making great earnings, but yeah, it's like there's really no business you're buying. It's
Right.
his you're buying his lifestyle, which that's not so
Right.
attractive. Um,
Exactly.
so if can you kind of let's so we're what we're kind of describing, I use the word like a spectrum. We've got a spectrum of heavily owner dependent companies. Like nothing happens without the owner being there. At the other end of the spectrum, like you pointed out, you got somebody that can, they supervise, they put in a few hours a week and the business is still thriving. Can you just kind of, do you have any examples of companies that kind of sit at different places along that spectrum, and any kind of illustrations about how that, what difference that made to buyers?
Yeah, I think this tends to happen more in some of the professional services businesses, where in particular, particularly these are asset light businesses where the goodwill is almost entirely, the owners or the partners of the business, and so it's really, and so when they sell and walk out the door, then all the goodwill of that business is really all you're selling is the goodwill of the business, kind of walks out the door with them. And so I think it's tough to monetize, and it's tough to really, you can give a value to the business. It's really the buyers are just reluctant to pay for that value and in any significant way when the deal closes to monetize the value of the business.
What's an example? Like, you said like professional firms. Like, what's an example?
Engineering services firms, architecture firms, law firms, accounting firms.
This is like with a small team, like with one or two.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I think those larger entities, if you're an architecture firm doing 4 to 5 million in revenues or something, and so you got to, you're managing the business as opposed to actually drafting the architect, doing the architectural work, that becomes of value. All right, then you have significant value there that you'll be compensated for. So it's really the two extremes. I'd say, Kevin, more than anything, it's often why very small businesses just don't command the multiples on earnings that larger businesses do, for those kinds of reasons,
Right. So are there?
It's just much more risk associated with it.
Sure. And so I know there's also a lot of different kind of buyers out there. There's the big hedge fund and private equity group buyers, and you've got people that are looking to buy a business or are looking to buy something smaller. So are there buyers, or what can you say about the different kind of buyers that might be interested in a solo attorney, law firm versus they want a 20-person law firm or any whatever business?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the private equity community probably is they're looking at firms that are generating at a minimum, about $1 million a year. And so, a firm that's doing that has probably got at that level of earnings, probably has a pretty reasonable management team, may have a very good management team that's independent of the owner in place. And that's what they're looking for. And they may, a private equity firm may look to supplement kind of the management team with their, hires to make up for some deficiencies that they may see in it. But generally they hope it's owner independent, unless the owner wants to stay on as a part of the management team ongoing. But at that point, as an employee as opposed to an owner. So I think individual buyers, smaller strategic buyers buying smaller firms, I think it's unless you can clearly show that when the owner transitions out of the business, that the business is not going to transition out with him, then I think that then you could command a reasonable multiple on your business and probably get a fair amount of money up front. But the extent that you can't prove that, then I think it's going to be difficult to sell.
Okay, so it's about the team and the quality of the management and the systems, that there's basically, if the business can generate earnings when the owner's not around, that's worth a whole lot more.
Yeah, that's worth a whole lot more than you know, and the universe of buyers goes up significantly, you know, in terms of you know, because I think in terms of people wanting to invest in that kind of business.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit like some of these smaller businesses where an individual is coming in to buy the business and just buying a job.
Right.
You got to find a buyer who wants that job, who understands that job, and has some experience with it. As you can imagine, the universe of buyers looking for that kind of opportunity is pretty limited. You know.
Yeah.
It's confined to that group.
Yeah. And actually, we've seen that on one project we're working on, where it was a real niche kind of company, a lot of people looking at it, but only one person, you know, making an offer and really willing to dig in and take over the job of the owner. All right, great. So you mentioned, you know, kind of the earnings and multiples, any kind of sense. And again, it's hard without getting specific within a business or an industry, but any sense of how a buyer would value a company in terms of the multiple that they would apply based on the management dependency? Like what's that worth, basically?
Yeah.
Any way of...
So, you know, a really highly owner dependent business, you know, might trade at on an adjusted EBITDA basis, you know, not a seller's discretionary earnings basis, but an adjusted EBITDA basis might sell for 3 to 3.5 times that number.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a well-run, well-organized business generating earnings where the owner is not crucial to the ongoing function of the business, might trade anywhere from 5 to 7 times that number. So it's a big difference, you know.
Great. Yeah, it's a huge difference if we're talking, you know, $1 million in earnings, you're, you know, $500,000, $2 million, you know, at whatever level of earnings, you're talking about almost a double multiple. So it really means the business is doubly valued. It's worth twice.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit hard to, you know, generally businesses that are probably generating $1 million in earnings probably have some level of management support.
Sure.
Yeah, but you know, so to compare apples to apples, let's call a business that's generating $1 million in earnings that's highly owner dependent versus one that's generating $1 million in earnings that's not owner dependent in terms of running the business. Then the difference in the multiple between those two would be, let's say, 4 times for the owner dependent business versus 6 times for the owner independent business.
Okay. So it's a big chunk of money. I mean, if we're saying, you know, just to use your numbers, Jeff, if we're saying $1 million, and so it's either worth 4 million or 6 million. So the delta there, the differential is 2 million. So one of the things that I've talked with a lot of folks about is it's in the exit planning process and the exit preparation, it's worth a lot. Like it would be worth investing in some procedures, some management. Maybe you need a general manager, you need to put somebody in charge of, you know, you need to delegate and build your management team. And that's going to cost some money, but look at the upside if it's going to be worth $2 million more when you go to market. So. Right.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're absolutely right.
All right. Great. Well, anything else about that topic, or we'll jump into the next one?
Yeah, I just think it's you can't underestimate the power of having a really strong organization that operates where you've delegated a lot of what if you're a seller and you're an owner, you know, delegating a lot of responsibility down into the management team makes a big difference in terms of the value of the company.
All right, great.
Usually attractive to buyers.
Yeah. All right. Well, the next kind of category is financial controls, and again, you know, there's a spectrum there with not really good financial controls, you know, normal or regular to like really strong. So can you kind of start again with just defining the term, how you mean it in your process, and then we'll dig in a little bit.
So I think that when I talk about financial controls, I think the minimum expectation that I have is that you're at least using QuickBooks, right? Or some equivalent to that. And that, you're generating, which with the capability to generate kind of income statements and balance sheets, all right, at a very basic level.
Yeah.
So that you keep track of, revenues and earnings and expenses and and you have an understanding sort of your assets and liabilities on the whole thing. So beyond that, so that's just basic financial controls as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
And beyond that, people who begin to really want to understand their business through the income statement and the balance sheet begin to do things like track revenues by products or revenues by service type or revenues, by geography or whatever it may be. It's sort of important to their business. They have a keen understanding of kind of where your revenues are coming from and what's driving them, whether it's service or products or both. The next thing is, I would say, on the same level, is to keep track of, what your cost of sales and gross margins are, by service type, by product, by, segment it that way in a much more, granular form than you get typically with what companies where they're just lumping everything together.
Right.
Because buyers want to know, where are you making your money? What products are generating earnings and what products are generating revenues and who's doing what in terms of the organization there. And then, organize your expenses so that if you were in the buyer's, categorizing expenses, you were in the buyer's shoes, you'd want to know kind of where on on a G&A side and operating expense side, kind of where that is all going. So it's meaningful to a buyer.
Yeah, so you allocate expenses to,
right. Yeah. And I think also you may want to look at, if you're in a particular type of industry, there's usually ways to organize your financial statements that are sort of industry standard for that industry.
Okay.
I would organize them from the get-go to industry standards for your industry and begin to use them. And people are financially driven. In other words, if they have sophisticated financial controls or financial reporting, generally are really honed in on their operations. They're keenly interested in finding out where they're making money and what's doing well for them. So if you have that, and we get a wide spread of how well people do those kinds of things. It'll benefit, even if you're not selling your business, it'll benefit you in terms of operating your business. And then when you go to sell a business, the buyers will have a whole lot more confidence in what they're buying. They'll have a keener understanding. And so you're going to get, that'll add value to ultimately what you have, because the more confidence they have in terms of what they're buying, the better their perception of risk is on the acquisition. And if their risk is, if they view the business as less risky, so they understand it better, the higher the multiple they're going to pay.
All right, great. Yeah, that's the second time you've mentioned confidence. You mentioned it as well in the management dependency so from the buyer's perspective, they want to know this will continue. I'll continue to get these earnings. I can bring my skill set and maybe grow this company, but at least I'm confident in the team and the structures they put in place, and they've got financial controls. I guess the opposite end of the spectrum is the prototypical guy with a shoe box full of receipts, right?
Yes, that's no financial controls. So I tend not to deal with companies like that anymore. So I think that's, you got to have at least, for us to deal with it, you got to have at least QuickBooks kind of operating and undergoing in your organization.
Yeah, I had a recent conversation with a guy doing great business from his perspective and his checkbook, but two very, very different businesses in terms of their seasonality, their customers. I mean, just almost like two separate businesses. He didn't have any way of helping me see what was selling and earning and the margins and the profits it just got to the point where I can't if you can't help me see this, a buyer's not going to see it. You're just not going to get much.
Right. Right. So I think, no, you're right. I mean, it's all about, a lot of these things where we take a look at, management dependency, financial controls. Buying a business is a high risk proposition for buyers. I mean, for a seller, sometimes when they think about their business, they think the buyer should think about their business the way they think about the business, which is for them, a seller, it's often intuitive. And their view of risk is a lot about their business is much different than the risk that the buyer may be undertaking. So you've got to be able to give that when I talk about confidence, it's really, you got to give the buyer the same perspective you have. And the more you can do that by putting them at ease, the better off it's going to be for any negotiation and ultimately for the value of what they're willing to pay for.
Okay. So one of the questions I was thinking about is kind of a difference between the management dependency and the financial controls. The management dependency, you can kind of, the buyer's really going to have to learn a lot about the business and understand things and talk to people. The financial controls, like you probably as an intermediary or M&A guy or a business broker, you probably could get a sense pretty quickly of their financial controls by getting their P&Ls and their tax returns and their balance sheets. But are there ever cases where the seller kind of overstates their financial controls, or they say we understand it, but then when the buyer finally digs in, it's not there?
Yeah, I mean, that happens. I mean, I think it's on the other hand, generally we spend enough time up front before we bring a company to market to kind of highlight any of those issues and either rectify them or go into the sale process, sort of understanding them and explaining that to a potential buyer. Okay. That's not to say that, whoopses can't come along that you just don't understand. So I think, or you didn't know before you went to market with it.
Yeah. I think that's critical. Actually, two things you said. One was being really transparent with the buyers. It's like, you can't, they're going to find stuff out, whether or not they even get to a due diligence phase, they're going to find stuff out. So you got to put it all on the table ahead of time.
Right.
But the other thing you said, Jeff, was, kind of about rectifying was the word you used. Is that a part of your process at all? Or do you kind of notice there's a problem? So let's say around financial controls, where you would just kind of kick it back to the client and say, hey, you really need to this would be better if you had broken down by category, by geography, by product type. Is that becomes, it's an accounting thing or a CFO issue or their CPA issue maybe. So how?
I mean, I think for us, it's really, I can work with a seller and say, look, if you can't categorize your sources of revenue and your sources of earnings here in terms of products or services, if that's difficult for you to do, then this is going to be the impact in terms of the sale. This is the questions you're going to get.
Okay.
And so we try to be completely transparent and educate the seller in terms of what the costs are of not being able to do that in the sale process. And, I think as long as they're aware of that, and that it may, it doesn't mean we can't sell it. It just means it may sell for a lower price or the sale may be a bit more problematic,
So it's kind of,
you get into a position to say, look, somewhere you're going to have to define this, and it's probably going to be around some buyers who are going to insist on it. So just get ready for it. That's what it is.
So it's like optional to the seller to do that, but there's big consequences if they don't in terms of their price or the value.
Right.
The buyer's going to want it. So let's just do it. Let's get it done.
Right.
Okay. So again, any kind of similar thoughts, the same question, Jeff, about the management dependency. Can you speak to the difference in valuation or from a multiple perspective? A company doing a million in EBITDA and they've got good financial controls versus bad. Again, I think it's built in. If a company's doing $1 million in earnings, they've probably got some financial controls.
But even that, I mean, it's kind of, we run into companies that just, some of them are making $1 million and have a great, they really understand their operation. They understand kind of what's really driving their revenues and earnings and what's not driving their revenue and earnings. And they make operational decisions based on that, which
Yeah.
it's sort of a virtual kind of cycle for
Yeah.
them in terms of
Yeah.
improving their business.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to get, instead of selling for 4 times, they'll sell for 6 times, so I think that's the difference. And
Okay.
because I think it's all about the more you show that your business is well operated, well understood, and well controlled,
Yeah.
just gives people more confidence over others who have a harder time explaining that,
Great.
or
Well,
showing, demonstrating where it is that they're
Yeah.
doing well.
Yeah, I had a client I think of the differences like between being strategic versus opportunistic. So a strategic business that's got good earnings, they're going to gather the information about where it's coming from, how did we get this, what are our expenses about it, so they can make real-time decisions about investing and growing. I had a client who just had this opportunistic big bump in revenue and earnings, but it wasn't based on strategy. It wasn't like studied. And it's a big difference from the buyer perspective, because they couldn't really back it up. How did you grow? How did you decide to do more of this? How do you do that? Oh, they were lucky. They got a pandemic big bump.
Right.
And it wasn't strategic.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Any other thoughts about financial controls? Just kind of, or any stories of, where it really kind of blew up, or it went, or just that?
Yeah, I think also a lot of sellers, I think it's sort of a natural thing. They tend to focus on the income statements and not their balance sheets.
Okay.
And they really should clean up their balance sheets and really understand kind of what their balance sheets are telling them in terms of some of their, performance metrics on asset ratios, all that kind of thing that they need to take a look at. And because the buyers are going to be taking a look at, particularly in the private equity community, they ought to understand kind of how they're valuing inventories, and is it done correctly? Are these things updated? And is it current? And if they got a lot of weird stuff on the balance sheet that's extraneous and probably ought to be adjusted out, and all those kinds of things. They need to take a harder look at what the balance sheet is telling them and understanding it more.
Yeah. Well, I love what you just said there, because I think the best way to support a seller and help them maximize their value is to educate them about how the buyer's going to look at your business. So if you kind of, and it is known, like we know what buyers are going to ask for, look for, we know they're doing their ratio analysis. So why wouldn't you, as a smart seller, understand that and look at how you can improve your management dependency, or your financial controls, or the other items that we'll talk about, kind of like, let's help rig the game in your favor to get you more value for your company. So it's, all right, great.
Right. Really good firms have they got enough earnings that they've hired some CFO or some, CPA type bookkeeper who's doing that on a regular basis for them, and they should have them do it,
Yeah. All right, great.
Because when you sell to the private equity community, a lot of it is balance sheet driven in terms of the value of the business. And they're going to want to know kind of all the issues around working capital and levels of working capital, and it needs to be pretty accurately reported and pretty well understood.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue where you've got professional buyers and a seller that maybe has never done this before. So that kind of also points to the really strong benefit of having an intermediary or a broker, or somebody that's gone through the process, that can guide you through the process. Otherwise, you leave a lot of money on the table if you don't have good representation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you for your thoughts here today on these topics. We're going to reconvene, and our next call, we're going to talk about another couple topics in the same category of risk adjustment factors. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Today, Jeff. And I enjoyed it.
If you're thinking of selling your business now or someday, reach out to Jeff or me to begin this important conversation. Thank you.